The morning after the funeral, I woke up and could not remember how to be a person. This is not poetry. It is not metaphor. It is the plain fact of what happened. I opened my eyes in the bed I had shared with Daniel for 11 years, and for a long moment I did not know what the ceiling was, or why my body felt so heavy, or why there was a shape of absence next to me that seemed to have its own gravity. I lay there while the light changed from gray to pale yellow, and I thought, this is what it means to be unmade. Daniel had been dead for 5 days. The funeral was yesterday. The house still smelled like the flowers people had brought. Too many, too sweet. As if enough lilies could fill the space where a man used to be. I had not washed the dishes from the reception. I had not returned the calls from my sister in Portland. I had not opened the mail that was beginning to pile up on the hall table. I had done nothing except exist in this new and terrible geometry, where the world had rearranged itself around an absence, and I was still trying to find the door. Margaret came at 10. I heard her key in the lock. She had always had a key. Daniel had given it to her when we bought the house. And I had never asked for it back because I was young and wanted to be liked, and later because it seemed like too small a thing to fight about. She let herself in with the same practiced efficiency she brought to everything. I heard her heels on the hardwood, the click and pause as she assessed the state of the entryway, the small sound of disapproval she made when she saw the mail. Nora, she called. Not a question, not a greeting, a summons. I was in the kitchen, sitting at the table where Daniel and I had eaten breakfast for 11 years. I had not eaten breakfast. I had been sitting there for an hour, maybe, watching the light move across the countertops. I did not turn around. Nora. She appeared in the doorway, and I felt her presence fill the room the way it always did, too large, too bright, too certain. Margaret was 68, with silver hair cut short and severe, and the kind of posture that came from growing up wealthy and never doubting her right to occupy space. She was wearing a black suit that probably cost more than my first car. Her eyes swept over me, the pajamas I had not changed out of, the tangled hair, the face I had not bothered to wash, and I watched her decide that I was failing at grief. Margaret, I said. My voice sounded strange. I had not used it much. She sat down across from me without being invited. She placed her hands flat on the table, the way Daniel used to when he was about to deliver difficult news. I noticed she was not wearing her wedding ring. I noticed because I had always noticed small things about Margaret, the way she held her wine glass, the way she corrected other people's children, the way she looked at me across Thanksgiving tables like she was still deciding whether I was adequate. I'm going to get straight to the point, she said. I've spoken with Peter. Peter was her attorney. I had met him twice, at parties, and had found him to be the kind of man who shook hands too firmly and laughed too loudly at his own jokes. He had a face like a used car salesman and the soul of an accountant. I'm going to be taking the house, Margaret said, and the law firm, Daniel's shares, the partnership, the accounts, all of it. She paused as if waiting for me to argue. I did not argue. I watched a small muscle in her jaw twitch. Of course, she continued. I'm not unreasonable. You can keep the furniture that belonged to you before the marriage, and I'll give you time to find somewhere else to live. 30 days should be sufficient. 30 days. I had been married to her son for 11 years. We had bought this house together. We had painted the nursery together. We had stood in this kitchen while our daughter took her first steps, her small hands gripping the counter, Daniel's voice low and steady. Come on, Ruby, come on. Margaret, I said, where is Ruby? She blinked. Ruby is fine. She's with the nanny. I told you I'd take her today. I had forgotten. I had forgotten so many things. The nanny, a quiet girl named Elena who had been with us for 2 years, who loved Ruby with a gentle patience I had never quite managed to learn. I had forgotten she was coming. I had forgotten what day it was. I had forgotten that my daughter existed for a moment, and the remembering hit me like a physical blow, and I had to close my eyes. Nora. Margaret's voice had shifted into something that was almost patient. I understand this is difficult, but we need to be practical. There are decisions to be made. I'm not going to let sentimentality get in the way of what's right. What's right? I opened my eyes and looked at her. Her face was composed, immaculate, the face of a woman who had never once in her life been unsure. She had raised Daniel alone after his father left when he was 6. She had built the law firm from nothing, then handed it to him when he was 32, watching him take over with the same careful supervision she applied to everything. She had never liked me. She had tolerated me at best because Daniel had insisted, and Daniel had always been her weakness, the one thing she could not control, the one thing she loved enough to let have his own way. I'm taking the house, the law firm, all of it except the daughter, she said. You can have visitation, I'm not a monster. But Ruby is a Whitmore and she needs to be raised by family, the daughter. Not my daughter, not Ruby. The daughter, I sat there, and I felt something shift inside me. Something that was not anger and not despair and not the hollow grief that had been my companion for 5 days. It was something else. A clarity, maybe. A stillness. I had spent 11 years trying to be what Margaret wanted. I had learned to speak carefully around her, to dress appropriately, to host dinners where the food was perfect and the conversation was safe. I had curated my life into something she could approve of, and Daniel had loved me for it, and I had loved him, and I had thought that was enough. But Daniel was gone now, and Margaret was sitting across from me, and she was taking everything, and I found that I did not care about the house or the firm or the accounts. I cared about Ruby. I cared about the small, warm weight of her in my lap, the way she smelled like soap and sleep, the way she said "Mama" in the morning with her voice still creaky from dreaming. I cared about not losing her, but I also cared, in that moment, about something I could not name, something that felt almost like relief. Okay, I said. Margaret stared at me. I beg your pardon. Okay, take the house, take the firm. I don't want to fight. She leaned forward. Her eyes had narrowed the way they did when she was trying to solve a puzzle she had not anticipated. Nora, I'm not sure you understand what I'm saying. I'm taking everything. Everything except Ruby. And I'm giving you 30 days. I understood. Then what's wrong with you? The question hung between us, sharp and unfair. I looked at Margaret, and I realized something I had never allowed myself to see before. She was afraid. Not of losing the house or the firm, those were certainties, things she could control. She was afraid of me, of what I might do, of the possibility that I might fight back and make things difficult, but I was not going to fight. I was not going to give her the battle she wanted. I was going to sit here in my pajamas, with my unwashed face and my hollow chest, and I was going to let her take everything. Nothing is wrong with me, I said. I just don't want to spend the rest of my life fighting over things that don't matter. Don't matter? Her voice rose. The house doesn't matter? The firm doesn't matter. Daniel built that firm. He poured his life into it. And you're just going to walk away? I looked at the table. There was a scratch on the wood, a mark Ruby had made with a fork when she was 2, before we learned not to give her metal utensils. Daniel had wanted to refinish the table. I had said it didn't matter, the scratch was a memory. He had smiled and kissed my forehead and said I was right, it was a memory. Daniel is dead, I said. Nothing I do with the firm will bring him back. Nothing I do with this house will make it feel like it did before. So what's the point? Margaret opened her mouth and closed it again. I had never seen her at a loss for words before. She looked at me like I was a language she could not read, a problem she could not solve. 30 days, she said finally. I'll have Peter draw up the paperwork. Fine. She stood up. She adjusted her jacket, smoothed her hair, composed herself back into the woman who had walked through the door. But I could see the cracks, the slight tremor in her hands, the way she kept glancing at me like she expected me to change my mind. I'll take Ruby for the day, she said. Alina will bring her back tonight. I'm having dinner with some friends from the firm and I want Ruby to meet them. She's old enough to start understanding her legacy. Legacy. Ruby was 4 years old. Her legacy was that her father had died too young, and her grandmother was already deciding what kind of person she would become. I felt something twist in my chest. not anger, but a strange and distant sadness. I did not want Ruby to become a Whitmore. I did not want her to inherit Margaret's sharp edges and her certainty, her belief that the world was a thing to be controlled and conquered. I wanted Ruby to be soft. I wanted her to be curious. I wanted her to know that it was okay to not know, but I did not say any of this, I just nodded. Margaret left. I heard her heels on the hardwood, the door opening and closing. The silence that followed was different from the silence before. Heavier somehow, as if she had taken something with her. I sat at the table for a long time. The light changed from yellow to white to gray. The kitchen was cold, and I was still wearing my pajamas, and I had not eaten. And I was so tired that I felt like I was made of water, formless and ready to spill. I thought about Daniel. I thought about the way he had looked at me on our wedding day. Like I was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. Like he could not believe his luck. I thought about the way he had held Ruby the first time, his hands so careful, his face so full of wonder. I thought about the last time I had seen him alive 3 weeks ago, standing in the kitchen with his coffee, reading something on his phone, looking up to smile at me before he left for work. I had not known it was the last time. That was the thing about grief. It was not a single moment. It was every moment you had ever taken for granted coming back to haunt you. David came the next morning. He was my attorney, and he looked like a man who had not slept well in years. Rumpled suits, dark circles under his eyes, the kind of exhaustion that came from caring too much and being paid too little. He had been my father's lawyer before I was born, and he had handled the small legal things that came up in our lives. The mortgage, the will, the quiet paperwork of middle-class existence. I had called him 2 days after the funeral, not knowing what else to do. "Nora," he said, sitting down across from me at the kitchen table, the same chair Margaret had occupied. "I need you to tell me what happened," I told him. His face went through a series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, concern, then a tight-lipped anger that I had not expected from him. "She can't do that," he said. "She has no legal standing. The house is in both your names. The firm, Daniel's shares passed to you, not to his mother. She has no claim on any of it. She says she does. She says a lot of things. That doesn't make them true." He leaned forward. "Nora, I've known you since you were a child. I've never seen you back down from anything. Why are you backing down from this?" I looked at the scratch on the table. Ruby's scratch. The memory I had refused to erase. "I'm not backing down," I said. "I'm choosing something else." "What? I don't know yet." David stared at me. He took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes, and for a moment he looked older than I had ever seen him. "Listen to me. Margaret is going to steamroll you. She's already hired Peter to do exactly that. She's going to take your house, your assets, your daughter. She's not taking Ruby. She can't take Ruby. She has no standing there either. But if you don't fight her on the house and the firm, you're giving her leverage. You're showing her that you don't care about the things that matter to her, and she'll interpret that as weakness." I nodded slowly. "I understand that. Then fight." "I don't want to." David sat back. He looked at me with something approaching despair. "You've always been stubborn. I remember when you were 12 and your father told you not to get a tattoo, and you showed up at my office with a henna one on your arm just to prove you could. You were impossible then, and you're impossible now, but at least then you were fighting for something. I'm still fighting." "For what?" "Tell me. Name it." I thought about it. I thought about what I was fighting for, and I realized it was not something I could put into words yet. It was not the house, or the firm, or the money. It was not even Ruby. Not exactly. Ruby was the center of everything, but she was not the fight itself. I was fighting for the right to let go, to not be defined by the things I owned, to not spend years of my life in a battle that would only make me harder and more brittle, more like Margaret. I had seen what that kind of fighting did to people. I had seen it in Daniel's face, the way his shoulders would tense when he came home after a day at the firm, the way he would drink whiskey and stare at the wall and not talk about what was bothering him. I did not want that to be my life. I did not want Ruby to grow up watching her mother fight a war she could not win. I'm fighting for peace, I said finally. David laughed, but it was not a happy laugh. Nora, there is no peace. There's just winning and losing. I've been a lawyer for 40 years, and the only thing I've learned is that the people who don't fight end up with nothing. Maybe nothing is what I need. He shook his head. He took off his glasses and cleaned them on his tie, a nervous habit he had always had. I'm going to tell you something I've never met anyone else. When my wife died, I fought her family for everything: the house, the savings, the photo albums. I won. I won everything. And I've spent the last 15 years wondering if it was worth it. Was it? He looked at me, and there was something in his eyes that I had never seen before, a brokenness, a grief that had never fully healed. I don't know, he said. I won, but I lost the thing that mattered most. I lost the memory of who she was. I turned her into a battle, and now all I have is the stuff: the house, the money, the things I fought for, and none of it brings her back. I reached across the table and took his hand. He let me. I'm not going to fight, I said again, not because I'm weak, not because I don't care, but because I want to remember who I am. And who I am is not someone who wins by taking things from other people. David was quiet for a long time. Then he squeezed my hand and let go. Fine, he said. But you need to know the risks. If you don't fight, you lose everything. Margaret will control Ruby's life. She'll make decisions about her education, her future, her inheritance. She'll try to turn Ruby against you. It will be hard, I know. And you're still willing to do this? I thought about Ruby. I thought about her small face, her bright eyes, the way she looked at me like I was the whole world. I thought about the life I wanted for her, not the life Margaret wanted, with its private schools and its legacy and its careful rules about what was proper and acceptable. I wanted Ruby to be free. I wanted her to know that she could choose her own life, that she did not have to inherit the weight of her grandmother's expectations. Yes, I said. I'm willing. The hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks later. David sent me the documents to review. He had prepared defenses, countersuits, motions to dismiss, all the legal machinery of a contested estate. I read through them, and I signed none of them. Instead, I signed the papers Margaret's attorney had prepared: the house, the firm, the accounts. Everything except Ruby. David called me, furious. What are you doing? I'm signing. You're giving away everything. I'm giving back what was never mine. Nora, you bought that house with Daniel. You helped build the firm. You were a partner in the marriage. Those assets are yours as much as his, and by law they pass to you, not to his mother. I know the law, David. I've read the documents. Then why? I looked out the window of my temporary apartment, a small, sparse place I had rented with the money I had left. It was nothing like the house. It had no garden, no memories, no ghosts. But it had a window, and the light came in cleanly, and it was mine. Because I don't want to be in a courtroom for the next 5 years, I said. Because Ruby doesn't need to grow up watching her mother fight with her grandmother. Because I want to be present for her, not consumed by this. But Ruby will know who I am. She will know that I chose her over the house, over the money, over everything. She will know that I did not let her grandmother turn me into someone else. There was a long silence on David's end. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter, less angry. You're really going to do this? I already have. Then I'll be there at the hearing. I'll support you, even if I disagree. Thank you, David. I hung up the phone and looked at the stack of signed documents on the table. I had read them carefully. I had noted the clauses about Ruby, Margaret's demand for sole custody, which I had accepted. I had noted the provisions about visitation, which I had not challenged. I had noted the quiet, careful way Margaret had written herself into Ruby's future, as if I were already a ghost. But I had also noted something else. Something that had caught my attention the first time I read the documents, something I had kept to myself because I was not sure what it meant. It was a provision about the firm. A clause buried deep in the partnership agreement. Something Daniel had mentioned once in passing, something I had barely understood at the time. It had to do with the founder's shares, with the way the firm was structured, with the conditions under which control could transfer. I had not mentioned it to David. I had not mentioned it to anyone. I was not sure it mattered. But I had noted it and I had filed it away, and I was waiting to see what happened. The day of the hearing, I wore a gray dress that I had bought years ago and never worn. It was simple, unadorned, the kind of thing that would not draw attention. I put on a little lipstick because I did not want to look like I had given up entirely. Ruby was with Elena, who had promised to take her to the park and feed her ice cream and make sure she had a good day. David picked me up at the apartment. He was wearing his best suit and his most determined expression. He looked at me and nodded once like he understood. "Ready?" he asked. Ready. The courthouse was an old building, all marble and brass and high ceilings. It smelled like floor wax and anxiety. We walked through metal detectors and down long hallways, and I felt the eyes of people following me. The clerks who had seen too many heartbroken widows, the lawyers who recognized the case as one that would make good gossip. Margaret was already there, sitting at a table with Peter. She was dressed in her best, a navy suit that looked expensive and severe. Ruby was not with her. I was grateful for that. "Nora," Margaret said, rising to greet me. She did not offer her hand. "I'm glad you came to your senses." I did not respond. I sat down at the table across from her, and David sat beside me. The judge had not arrived yet. The room was quiet, except for the rustle of papers and the distant sound of someone crying in another courtroom. "Nora," Margaret said again. Her voice was softer now, almost gentle. "I want you to know that I don't hold any ill will toward you. I'm sorry it had to come to this, but I'm doing what's best for Ruby." I looked at her. I looked at her composed face, her perfect hair, her unshakable certainty, and I saw for the first time not a villain, but a woman who had been afraid for her whole life, afraid of losing control, afraid of being left behind, afraid of being as helpless as she had been when her husband walked out and she had to raise Daniel alone. "I know you are," I said. Margaret blinked. She had expected anger, bitterness, resentment. She had not expected agreement. It unsettled her in a way I could see but could not explain. "All right," she said, recovering. "Then let's get this over with." The judge entered. He was a thin, tired man with gray hair and a face that had seen too much. He looked at the documents, looked at the lawyers, looked at me and Margaret. "This is the matter of the estate of Daniel Whitmore," he said. "I understand there is an agreement between the parties." "Yes, Your Honor," Peter said, standing up. "We have prepared the final documents for Nora Whitmore's signature. My client, Margaret Whitmore, will assume control of all assets, including the house, the law firm, and the accounts." The judge looked at me. "And you agree to this, Mrs. Whitmore?" "Yes, Your Honor." He looked at me for a long moment. I could not tell what he was thinking. Approval, disapproval, simply the weariness of a man who had seen too many families destroyed by money. "All right," he said. "Proceed." Peter slid the documents across the table to me. I took the pen from David's hand. I signed the first page. I signed the second. I signed the third. Each signature felt lighter than the last, as if I were peeling away a weight I had been carrying for years. Margaret was smiling. She could not help herself. It was a small smile, restrained, the smile of a woman who had won. She was probably already planning what she would do with the house, the gardens she would plant, the renovations she would make. She was probably already thinking about the firm, about the partners she would bring in, about the legacy she would build for Ruby. "Are you all right, Nora?" David asked. His voice was quiet, full of care. I nodded. "I'm fine." I signed the last page. I looked up at Margaret, and I saw her smile widen just slightly, and then Peter gasped. It was a small sound, a sharp intake of breath. But in the silence of the courtroom, it was unmistakable. I looked at him. He was staring at the documents, his face white, his hands trembling. He had turned to a page near the end, something I had noticed only because I had read everything carefully. A page with a clause about the transfer of founders' shares. "Peter?" Margaret said. Her voice was sharp. "What is it?" Peter did not respond. He was reading, his eyes moving rapidly across the page. The color had drained from his face, and I could see a vein throbbing in his temple. Peter, Margaret said again. This time her voice was frightened. Your Honor, Peter said, standing up. His voice was shaking. I need a moment. The judge raised an eyebrow. Counselor, I need to consult with my client. The judge nodded, and Peter leaned over to whisper in Margaret's ear. I watched her face change. The smile fell away. Her eyes widened, then narrowed, then widened again. Her hands gripped the edge of the table, and I saw her knuckles go white. What are you talking about? She said. Her voice was loud, too loud for a courtroom. That's impossible. It's not possible. Daniel told me. Daniel was wrong, Peter said quietly. Or maybe he knew and didn't tell you. Margaret stared at him. Her mouth opened and closed. For the first time in the years I had known her, she looked uncertain. She looked afraid. Your Honor, Peter said, turning back to the judge. I need to request a continuance. There's been a mistake. Explain, the judge said. Peter cleared his throat. He was trying to compose himself to recover the professional demeanor he had lost. It appears there is a provision in the partnership agreement that prohibits the transfer of founders' shares to anyone except. Except. Except what? The judge asked. Peter swallowed. Except a surviving spouse who holds 51% of the total. But Daniel didn't have 51%, Margaret said. Her voice was shrill. The partnership was divided evenly. That's what he told me. The partnership was divided evenly, Peter said slowly. But Daniel had been buying back shares from retiring partners for years. I didn't know about it. It wasn't in the documents he gave me. But it's here, in the supplementary materials. He was building toward something. He wanted. He stopped. He looked at me. His face was pale and his eyes were wide with something approaching comprehension. He wanted to give it to her, Peter said. He wanted to give her the firm. He just didn't have time to tell anyone. The room went silent. I felt David's hand on my arm, his grip tight and urgent. Nora, he said, do you know about this? I looked at him. I thought about the clause I had found, the one I had not mentioned. I thought about Daniel, about the way he had looked at me in the last months of his life, the way he had seemed distracted, the way he had talked about the future without ever being specific. I knew, I said quietly. I read the documents, I saw the clause. Because I didn't want to fight. David stared at me. Margaret stared at me. Peter stared at me. The judge stared at me, and I sat there in my gray dress, and I felt nothing but a quiet, steady peace. Your Honor, I said, standing up, I don't want the firm. I don't want the house. I don't want any of it. But I need to make something clear. The judge leaned forward. Mrs. Whitmore, I signed the documents because I wanted to avoid a battle. But I also signed them because I wanted Ruby to know that there's more to life than fighting over things that don't matter. I wanted her to know that she is not defined by her inheritance or by her grandmother's expectations. I wanted her to know that she is free. I looked at Margaret. She was pale, shaking, her hands pressed flat against the table as if she needed the support. But I also want her to know that I will not let her be controlled, I said. I will not let her be turned into a weapon. I will not let her be used to punish me or to advance anyone's agenda. She is a child. She is my child. And I will protect her, even if that means protecting her from you. Margaret's face crumpled. It was not dramatic. There was no crying, no breakdown. But something shifted in her expression, something that was close to devastation. You think I'm doing this to hurt you, she said. Her voice was barely above a whisper. I think you're doing this because you're afraid, I said. You've always been afraid, Margaret. You were afraid of losing Daniel. You're afraid of losing Ruby. You're afraid of losing control. And you've been fighting so hard to keep everything that you've forgotten what it's like to hold something without squeezing it to death. The room was silent. I had not meant to say that. It had come out on its own. The truth I had been carrying for 11 years. Margaret looked at me. For a moment I thought she would argue. Her mouth opened and I could see the shape of denial forming. Then it closed and her eyes filled with tears. I loved him, she said. I loved him so much. He was all I had, and now, I nodded. I know. The judge cleared his throat. Mrs. Whitmore, the court needs to know what you want to do with the assets that are rightfully yours. You've signed away the house and the accounts, but it sounds like the firm is a different matter. I looked at the documents spread across the table. I looked at Margaret, at her pain and her fear and her desperate, grasping love. I thought about Daniel, and I tried to imagine what he would have wanted. I don't want the firm, I said. I don't want to be a lawyer. I don't want to spend my life in that building, surrounded by people who are fighting for things that won't matter in the end. Then what do you want? David asked. I thought about it. I thought about the small apartment with its clean light. I thought about Ruby and the way she laughed when I tickled her. I thought about the freedom I had felt when I signed those papers, the lightness that had come from letting go. I want my daughter, I said. I want to raise her without fear. I want to teach her that she doesn't have to be afraid of losing things, because the things that matter can't be lost. And I want Margaret to know that she can see Ruby as much as she wants, as long as she remembers that Ruby is her own person, not a piece in a game. Margaret looked up at me. Her eyes were wet, and for the first time I saw something in her face that was not defiance. It was something softer, something that might have been gratitude. I don't understand you, she said. I've never understood you. You could take everything from me. You could destroy me. And you're just letting me go. I smiled. It was a small smile, the first real one I had felt in weeks. I'm not letting you go, I said. I'm setting myself free. I walked out of the courthouse into the afternoon sun. The sky was clear and the air was cool. And I felt something I had not felt in a long time. Hope. Ruby was waiting for me at the park, Elena's hand in hers. She saw me from across the lawn and ran toward me, her small legs pumping, her face bright with joy. Mama, she called. Mama, Mama, Mama! I knelt down and caught her in my arms. She was warm and heavy and solid, and I held her like she was the only thing that mattered in the world. Did you have fun? I asked. Yes, she said. We saw ducks, and I ate ice cream, and I picked up a bug and showed it to Elena, and she said it was nice. Was it nice? The bug was very nice. I laughed. It was a real laugh, full and warm and alive. Ruby laughed too, because she always laughed when I did, because she was 4 years old and the world was a playground. I stood up and took her hand. We walked toward the apartment, our feet clicking on the sidewalk, our shadows stretching long in the afternoon light. Later, I would think about the firm. I would think about the money I had given up, the house I had left behind. I would think about the life I had chosen to leave, the identity I had shed like a skin, but in that moment there was only Ruby and the sky and the simple sacred act of walking home. I had not won, I had not lost. I had done something more important than either. I had let go, and I was still standing. Margaret called 3 days later. Her voice was different, less sharp, less certain. She asked if she could see Ruby. I said yes. We set a date for the following Saturday. When she came to the apartment, she did not criticize the small space. She did not comment on the worn furniture or the mismatched plates. She sat on the floor and let Ruby show her the toys, and she listened with patience that I had never seen her display before. Later, when Ruby was napping, Margaret and I sat at the small kitchen table and drank tea. I'm sorry, she said. Her voice was quiet, almost too quiet to hear. I was wrong. I was so wrong. I nodded. I know. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't think I would forgive me. I looked at her. She was older than I had realized. Her face was lined, her hands were thin. She was a woman who had spent her whole life afraid, and that fear had made her cruel. I don't know if I can forgive you, I said. Not yet, but I'm willing to try. She nodded. She did not cry. She did not thank me. She just sat there and we drank our tea. And the silence between us was no longer hostile. It was not easy after that. There were hard days and misunderstandings and moments when the old patterns threatened to reassert themselves. But there were also moments of grace, small things, quiet things. The slow work of learning to be in the world together. Ruby grew. She learned to read and write. She learned to ride a bike. She asked questions about her father, and I answered them as honestly as I could. Margaret was part of her life, and I was part of her life, and slowly, painfully, we found our way forward. It was not the life I had imagined. It was not the life Daniel had imagined. But it was our life, and we made it our own. In the end, I did not win. I did not lose. I did something harder, and stranger, and more beautiful. I let go. And in letting go, I found something I had not known I was looking for. I found myself.